Hello and good morning, AP Euro guys. Today, March 25th, 2020. I have some, important things to go over today, and also my lecture will be a little shorter than it normally is because we're finishing the chapter. And so let's begin. Now, hopefully last night, or between now and last night, you looked at your email. I sent out an email about concerning the quiz. Announcement number one, the next quiz will be Friday, and the window of opportunity for taking it is from 7 in the morning until 12 that night, 11:59. And so, you have been warned. Everybody will take it. And so, yeah, that's big. Also, we're about to enter into this next unit, which I will not broach today. That's why I said the lecture would be shorter today. We're about to enter in the next unit, which discusses political movements of the 1920s, which are very important going forward. That could be the last unit we cover. Yeah. Before spring break, and then when we come back from spring break, hopefully, like Mr. Turner and Mr. Schaefer were talking about, we will come back to school April the 20th. I don't know how, if I had to bet money on that, I don't know how I would go. So let's just leave it at that. If we do, that's great. That would be so great. We would have approximately 3 weeks to review. We would then, of course, we could watch Schindler's List after the test. But if that doesn't happen, we'll go with the other plan of reviewing before the May 6th date, and then after May 6th, we will try to finish up the 20th century. Because this is an AP course, it's a college course, and we are going to continue doing something. And when I say doing something, these tests and quizzes online will continue. And you are expected every day, check your email, check Canvas. I never thought I'd be saying that. And of course, look for me on YouTube. All of my YouTube lectures, I put dates on them. So therefore, you'll know what date goes where. I do heartily suggest that, when you get these study guides online, that you print them out. And because it makes it much easier for taking notes. And that helps. Another thing is regarding, and I'm sure you're hearing this from every side imaginable, but do what you're supposed to do. And I'm not just talking about academically. I'm talking about staying home. I'm talking about social distancing. I don't know if you heard yesterday, but the Governor Bashir, went on, of course, gave his daily report. And he was quite upset. He was upset because there was a young man in his mid-20s who had contracted the coronavirus. And he was like 23 or 24, contracted the coronavirus. And he had recently been to a coronavirus party. One day there will be parties again. One day there will be, movies again. There will be sporting events again. There will be just chances to hang out and again. But right now, think about what we're doing. Think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We are basically hiding from a virus. That's our best hope not to get sick, is to hide from the virus. Because unless you actually get this virus, which puts your health at risk, which puts the health of a lot of healthcare workers at risk, unless you actually get the virus and recover from it, and that's not a guarantee, then there is no way to get immunity from it. You have no immunity. I have no immunity. And when you get that virus or come in contact with someone who does, even if you are able to somehow suffer only minor symptoms of the virus, you can then pass it on to people you know and love and care about. And so I hope I'm just preaching to the choir. I'm hoping that you guys all already do this. But, Governor Bashir is right, and he's right to be angry. We right now do not have the technology to beat this thing. We have to hide from it, and which is what we're doing. And yeah, I know it's very inconvenient. Yes, I know it's very boring. And yes, I know it's wrecking the economy. And the economy will get better. And you will get over it. And one day it'll be gone. But right now, we've got to stay in the bunker. And so let's finish this unit today. We were talking about the Treaty of Versailles yesterday. We were talking about Article 231 and the injustice of it, because it was unjust. It is said that World War I had 3 winners. And if I always like to do, if we were in class, I would say, okay, who won World War I? And people would put up hands. The United States did. Great Britain did. France did. No, and no. When you say, what do you mean, Mr. Horton? Well, to win a war, you get out of that war what you went into the war to acquire. And the bottom line for all 3 of those countries that you just mentioned, or that I just mentioned, and imagine that you did, the bottom line for all those countries was that in 20 years, they're fighting this war over again. Same thing. Basically the same combatants. And on a much grander scale. And, and of course, obviously the people who lost the war, the Germans or anybody else. But who won the war? There were 3 groups that won the war. Group number 1. I hope you're writing this down because that quiz is coming. Group number 1, munitions dealers. Munitions dealers made a fortune. And I do mean that. Some of the great fortunes of the United States, and most of them were the United States, some of the great fortunes of the United States of America were earned by people who produced armaments. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the most prominent families in Massachusetts who later occupied the White House invested heavily in armaments manufacturing. And munitions dealers were the big ones. And most of them were American munitions dealers, to be honest. Number 2, colonials who would have not gotten independence any other way. Between World War I and World War II, you start seeing a number of the colonies, the old colonies of the British and French empires, if not start breaking away, really start strong independence movements. The World War I had destabilized many of the governments, particularly, well, of course, obviously the losing governments, but a lot of the Middle Eastern countries got their starts after World War I, and of course, a lot of the countries of Eastern Europe were founded in 1918, but also a lot of the colonies in Africa, India, Southeast Asia. And finally, who can guess who was the last winner? Come on, think about it. I'll give you 3 seconds. Mr. Lynn? No, sorry, Mr. Lynn, you're wrong. Communist. Yes, had it not been for World War I, the communists were such a tiny minority, they could have never acceded to power. Remember, again, Karl Marx never envisioned communism, his idea, taking off in Russia. I mean, Russia, do I need to say it again? Russia was a big fat farm. Karl Marx envisioned communism taking off in an industrialized country, which at the time Russia was not. But yeah, the communists. The World War One, basically to stabilize the Russian government, the Tsar abdicated. They tried to erect a fledgling type government, and the Bolsheviks, who were a minority movement, a tiny minority, who just happened to own the control of the loyalty of the army, quit scratching your face. Yeah, they were able to take over. So yeah. So let's get back to it. Roman numeral 32, part B. Now, some criticisms of the Versailles Treaty were actually, were unjustified. Germany, for one, unlike what happened in World War II, Germany was not disunited. Germany was not split up again. That will happen after World War II, a condition which will last until 1989, from 1945 to 1989. And two, reparations could be scaled down, in other words, lowered over time, and they actually were, until the Great Depression, which once again, Great Depression is, if you want to look for a single cause of World War II, it's Great Depression. The Great Depression, until the Great Depression, Germany basically recovered and was actually having a decent rate of prosperity. After. They're going to go through a rough time first, though. The Germans, of course, had they won, they would have done the same thing that the Allies did to them. I mean, that's actually kind of funny, yeah? I mean, as was proven by the way they treated Russia in the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. I remember the Brest-Litovsk Treaty was when Russia surrendered to Germany. Germany hammered them in the, they had to pay lots of money. Russia lost the rest of Poland to the Germans. They also lost claim to Finland. And so, you know, don't think that the Germans were, the nice guys. There were no nice guys here, to be real honest. All is fair in love and war, I guess. And this also, World War I will be the most comprehensive, best effort at self-determination the Europeans had ever seen. Once again, remember that several of the countries of Eastern Europe, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, of course, Yugoslavia, will owe their existence to World War I and the breakup of the Austrian Empire. So there were, of course, other unsatisfactory portions of the treaty. For example, the elimination of the Austro-Hungarian Empire had several consequences, which, you normally you might think, well, that was a good thing, but economically, it was disastrous. You say, what does that mean? Okay, and so you take this big thing called the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which covers most of Eastern Europe, and then you divide it up into all these countries. Well, suddenly you have artificially created several barriers, borderlines, several barriers to economic trade that didn't exist before. People were now cut off from resources that they had depended upon regularly prior to World War I. And economically, that turns out to be a disaster for the short term. I mean, basically, it's one of the great things about the EU now, the European Union, is that, if you ever travel through Europe, and one day I hope to again, and you travel through the EU, you don't have to show passports at the border. Goods travel freely across the border. Well, in the old Austrian Empire, once they partitioned it into Czechoslovakia, into Poland, into Hungary, into Yugoslavia, into these other states, every time you crossed the border, you stopped and you had to pay a tariff. So Poland contained lots and lots and lots of unhappy German and Ukrainian minorities. Germany lost a lot of territory, and the people were still there, and they were not happy about living under a Polish government. And to be real honest, the Poles probably weren't the most generous of overlords. Czechoslovakia was a collection of minorities that didn't get along because you had your Czechs, your Slovaks, and oh yes, living in the Sudetenland, several million Germans, none of whom were happy to be tied up with the others. The peace rested entirely on a victory that Germany, with justification, that Germany still insisted didn't happen. Remember, when we approach World War II, that little guy, Adolf Hitler, his big claim will be, you know what? We surrendered, and there was not one foreign boot standing on German soil. And in fact, German armies were still occupying most of Belgium and deep into France. And suddenly we surrendered. And so, the Germans are saying that that victory that the Allies claimed really didn't exist. And now we're going to have to pay all this stuff for it. And the so-called high moral claims of the Allies, the peace without victors, they tried to say. High moral claims the Allies were undercut, as was their credibility. I mean, this Treaty of Versailles becomes a land grab for the British and French. And not only for the British and French, the Japanese felt cheated because, the Japanese fought in the war too. The Japanese took German possessions. And the Japanese, pardon me, the Japanese thought that, after the war was over with, these possessions we took from the Germans, risking our blood and treasure, we get to keep them. And that's not exactly how it panned out. And so the Japanese came away from the Treaty of Versailles not very happy. And they'll come, in the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, they'll be back. So, Part D. The great weakness of this treaty was its failure to accept reality. In my opinion, this is my opinion, but I think it makes a lot of sense. The biggest weakness of the Treaty of Versailles was simply the fact that as these guys were writing down all these harsh circumstances, none of them ever stopped to think, well, in 20 years, after the dust is settled, and but the wounds of the war are still open, what's going to happen when Germany particularly says, you know what, I just don't want to do this anymore. This is not fair, and we're not going to do this anymore, and what are you going to do about it? Well, the answer is that then you have to go back to war, a war that the British and French didn't want to wage again. Nobody wanted to wage because the losses of World War I were still fresh on their mind. But anyway, let's get back to this. The greatest weakness of the war was its failure to the treaty was its failure to accept reality. Germany and Russia were two of the largest and most important states in Europe, and they weren't even allowed to come to the peace treaty, peace talks. They were completely excluded, and excluded later from the new League of Nations. The peace was too severe to be enforced. That's my big one. It was too severe to be enforced, and there was no machinery in place to guarantee its enforcement. What if somewhere down the line Germany just decides, no, I'm not going to do that anymore? Well, we find out in 20 years what will happen. It was too severe. You say, what does it mean to be too severe to be enforced? And I used to give this example to my students. You can make rules too severe to be enforced, and that's the problem. When you make rules, for example, Let's pretend, you remember back in the good old days when we actually used to come to school and we actually used to sit in classrooms and, come in contact with each other. Do you remember when, all the kids would blah, 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 talk to each other, and cause a little disturbance? And, what if the teacher in the class, and I won't say me, what if the teacher in the class didn't like this and says, okay, in my closet, there is a guillotine, and the next student who talks out of turn will be placed on the guillotine and beheaded. Well, and then he shows the guillotine. He opens the door in the closet, guillotine. And for a while, students, nobody says a word. Maybe a day, maybe days, maybe a week, maybe longer. But eventually somebody's going to make a sound, voluntarily, involuntarily. And if that sound goes unnoticed, if that sound goes, unpunished, the bottom line is eventually somebody's going to say something. And then it will be up to the teacher. What you going to do? You really going to drag a kid out and cut his head off for saying something? And of course, then when the teacher doesn't do that, because, even in the United States of America, executing students with a guillotine is slightly against the law, slightly. So you're going to do that? Well, of course you're not. Well, what are you going to do? Answer? Look mean at them? No, it's nothing. And guess what's going to happen next? The talk will begin, and suddenly it'll be worse, if just as bad, if not worse than it used to be. And so, yes, that's the point. The Treaty of Versailles was too difficult, was too severe to be enforced. At one point in time, if you're the Allies, you got to put up or shut up. Finland, the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, those three states that are on the eastern rim of the Baltic Sea. The Baltic states, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia now were expected to act as buffer states, buffer zones against Russia. You see, after the war was ended, fear shifted from fear of this defeated Germany to fear of these new communists in Russia. And so, yeah, they create these new fledgling countries, Poland and all the ones I just mentioned, so that they would be like a barrier to aggression by the Russians. Meaning that if Russia decided to become aggressive and wage war, they would have to invade those countries first. And since nobody cares about them, it wouldn't matter. And it would give the real countries, the important countries, time to prepare. They could not function as such, however, without the help of France. And France had its own problems. France could not be depended upon for such aid if Germany became aggressive. See, France is still terrified of an active Germany. Yeah. That's why to the French, they were so focused on just pounding Germany into the dust. They were just like, we've got to beat these guys down to where they never come back. But there's an old saying about the treatment of Germany. There's no saying about the treatment of Germany. Actually, it's not about the treatment of Germany. It's about the treatment of anybody. And here's the old saying. Germany was down. And there's an old saying that says, you should never kick a man when he's down. And there is an addendum to that saying. And it goes like this. If you do kick a man when he's down, you better not let him up. France made both mistakes. They kicked Germany when they were down, and then they let them up. Okay. Treaty of Versailles was that it was neither conciliatory enough to remove the desire for changes of the terms, even at the cost of war, and also it was not harsh enough to make another war impossible. Any hope for peace would require the continued attention to the problem, unity amongst the victors, far-sighted leadership, but none of those things were consistently present in the next 20 years. I mean, basically what's going to happen in the next 20 years is everyone's going to turn inward towards their own interest. And that spirit of cooperation that somewhat functioned during World War I will disappear for about 20 years with the advent of, the advent of the Great Depression. Okay. Oh, it's killing me. So what are we doing, students? Let's see. Today, we're going to check our email. Today, we're going to check Canvas, although I can tell you that I will have that quiz quite ready, and it'll be a little bit longer of a quiz. I don't really think it's that much more difficult. And also, you can look for a test on Monday over this unit. We'll begin the new unit tomorrow, so make sure you tune in. But yes, we'll have a quiz Friday, test Monday, and continue our lectures tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and a shortened lecture on Monday, just so that we touch base. Okay? And that does me for today. Hope you have a nice day and do the right things. Bye for now.